Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths. We're going to be sharing our community connection show with you today, where we get to hear from you all and share some of your wonderful questions and stories. How's your week going so far, Denise?
It's okay. As we're recording this, we're right on the tail end of that beautiful polar vortex that so much of the country has been experiencing. So it's been interesting.
I know we had 4 inches of snow, which turned into ice. And I think my city has 1 snowplow, Denise.
Oh my
And
goodness.
somebody posted a video of the snowplow going through the city, and the plow wasn't actually all the way down. It wasn't doing anything.
Oh goodness. I think we
So
better jump into the questions.
I think so too.
Okay. Our first one, as I'm going through a very dark night of the soul and trying to understand everything, I keep coming across a couple of phrases, one of them being radical acceptance. And I think I have that one nailed down. But where I'm stuck is on the notion of surrendering. Can you all talk about what this is, how it looks and feels, and how to do it? In a society where it's understood to try harder, to never give up, to fight for all the things we want in life, how do I surrender? What am I surrendering to? And what's the difference between surrendering, giving up, and despair, hopelessness? I know what the definition is, but spiritually, what does it mean to surrender? I keep coming across the quote, the universe doesn't meet at the height of your struggle, but at the depth of your surrender. And I just don't know how to wrap my brain around it or know what it means to surrender in this sense. It's really interesting that this question comes up right now because I think many people are trying to be in a place of surrender, whether it's the political world, the economic climate, the unrest, or just their own personal time of transition. And I've been writing in my journal about this a lot the last couple of weeks. And what it keeps coming back to me is just show up, keep showing up in trust. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one, especially if you've had the rug pulled out from under you several times.
Oh my gosh, it really is. And I understand where this listener is coming from because she's right. We're told you have to keep trying harder and persistence pays off and never give up and, the little engine that could. But there comes a point, I think, when we have to marry those two concepts together and really evaluate, what am I struggling toward? What am I not giving up? What am I not seeing? Why is this so hard? And I think when we realize that sometimes the things we're trying so hard to achieve just aren't coming to fruition, that's when we have to surrender. And I don't think it means giving up. I think it means, how whenever I teach my manifesting classes, I always tell students to leave the back page of their goal book blank and to write really big across that, this or something better. Because what you're doing is you're telling the universe, these are the goals I'm hoping to achieve, but the universe as a whole, God, Goddess, Creator, however you want to term that, knows better. So I'm putting this out into the universe, but if there's something better or different out there for me that's more in alignment with who I am, I'm open to that. And that's kind of my idea of spiritual surrender, where you look at what you want, what you're working toward, what goals you have, but you also do it with an attitude of surrender, where you're not holding on to it. Like, this has to happen. I must never give this up.
That's really well said. Yes. And it's important. It's important, I think, with surrender to be gentle with yourself in the process and realize it's like learning to drive a manual transmission. You might jump forward and kick back a little bit, but eventually you'll be shifting pretty smoothly.
Yeah. And it's never easy. I think that's why it is a spiritual concept, because spiritual concepts aren't super one and done. You got to work on it from many, many different angles. I've told the story before and I've written about it in in the Awake Dreamer. I was having an issue with someone who was like super controlling, type A, and I had just had it, and I was like, no, I'm not going to be Miss Okay, sure, have it your way anymore. So I put my foot down. And what happens when you put your foot down with a type A person who's used to getting their way? Nothing good. And so we kind of had hit this point of contention. And I was just meditating in my comfy meditation chair. And I said to my guide, like, what do I do? How am I supposed to work through this problem? And I saw an image of this woman and I playing tug of war with this huge rope over a mud puddle. And he said, just let go. Just surrender it. Just let go. And I let go of the rope in my image. And you know what happened? She fell in the mud. And I realized what he was saying was, you got to just surrender this issue. And when I did surrender the issue we were arguing over, she did win, quote unquote. But what she won really showed her true colors. I'm trying to be polite and not give too much away, if that makes sense.
No, that's very well said.
But it ended up showing people like kind of where she was in life. And so that's my example of surrender. I think we do have to push and try, but there has to come a moment if what we're pushing toward and trying for doesn't come to fruition, then we have to surrender and just say, this or something better. I'm open and willing for new ideas, new avenues, new ways of looking at this.
And that's a really good point. If it's been something that has repeatedly come back into your life, or it's been a long-term goal, or it's been a situation that you've always known in your heart, I'm meant to, whatever that may be. And when you get to that place where you realize it's no longer an option, or there might be something better on the path, it's not always easy to surrender and let go.
No, but it's often when we surrender and let go that all the good things start to happen.
Very much so.
But it's not easy to know when you have to surrender. I get to that point where I just throw my hands up, metaphorically or literally, and I'm like, I'm out. I can't see any other way of handling this. And that's when I just give it up to my higher power, and that tends to really work for me.
Yeah.
Okay, our next one says, I've recently started listening to your podcast, and I'm hoping you may be able to guide me in the right direction. As long as I can remember, perfect strangers have engaged me in conversation and have revealed deep, dark secrets about their lives. Sometimes these conversations have been upwards of 3 hours. Today, I was able to provide encouragement to an individual who told me that they felt they had done so much wrong in their life and were ready to make changes for themselves and their family. For the privacy of this individual, I won't go into detail. My question for you is, why me? I do identify as an empath, but why do people seek me out and feel so comfortable revealing these things? I feel like I'm very unassuming and usually try to blend in with my surroundings. Well, this is actually really, really common among intuitives and especially empathic intuitives. I think it's because we tend to vibrate naturally pretty high. And I don't mean like, oh, we're super positive and everything's perfect and wonderful in our lives. I mean, I think those of us who are tuned into the interconnectedness of all that is, we tend to have a higher vibration, and people are attracted to that subconsciously. They don't see it or feel it, but they sense it with their subconscious own intuition. And I think they realize that we're safe people that they can talk to. And I think it's almost like a service that we do for others. I remember reading this in a bunch of intuitive development books when I was first starting out. And I guess I recognized it in me, but I don't know. I was like, maybe. But then I had my children and I watched, because they're all very intuitive. And in school, this would happen to them all the time. Or we would just be, starting a new dance class when they were doing ballet, and a girl they didn't even know would just, come up to them and tell them their stories, or someone who was bothering them at school. And as I watched it happening to my girl, it still happens to them. And we joke about it because doesn't that happen to you, Denise? It happens to us all the time.
Very much so, yes.
Don't you think it's a sign of intuition, or do you think it is more connected to empathy?
I think it's both. And I think that if we all hold all of who we are and everything in our auric field, that on some level people are picking up on the fact that we understand how they're feeling, because it really comes down to the empathy of emotion when people feel safe enough to disclose really personal things. And for some reason, we send out something in our aura or a vibration or the way that our body language or just everything in general that invites people to feel safe and to feel that we understand what they're feeling, and that 99% of empaths do feel other people's emotions. So it kind of makes sense that people feel safe
Yeah,
just
it
kind
does.
of dumping their bucket.
Don't you think when you're empathic, that tends to mean not as judgmental? Because I think most empaths have been through some stuff in their own lives. And so they don't project an energy of judginess.
And I think the hard part though is when you really, this is, it's not being a really nice, well, it's being honest. It's being very honest. When you don't have the bandwidth and someone needs to have you hold space for them and they're telling you that, and you're trying so desperately to listen, to be there, to hold space, but you're also trying to set some boundaries. And that's a tough one.
That's a very tough one. Because empaths will feel guilty when they can't set that boundary.
Right. Or they'll put their own lives on hold because they know that person needs them. But I don't think that's the direction this person was going, except when people do tell you, I mean, how many times when you've done readings have people disclosed to you, you say, well, who else knows about this? Nobody. I've never told anybody but you. And then
All the
that,
time.
right. And with that, especially if it's people coming up and telling you their deep, dark secrets, on some level, you're left holding that responsibility of
Mm-hmm.
keeping that secret and holding that space for someone.
Exactly. Another symptom of this usually are animals. Animals are attracted to you and feel safe with you.
True, true,
So
very
that's
much
another
so.
sign that you have this kind of empathy. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's a great thing, but you just have to be a little bit careful with it.
And I do love that this person said for the privacy of this individual, I won't go into detail, because if someone is feeling safe enough with you to disclose some very personal or some dark or some things that they finally need to release, I think our job is to make sure that we have the integrity to keep that in confidence for someone, unless they're in danger or in danger of hurting themselves or another.
Well said.
So, our next one, my favorite episodes when you talk about signs from loved ones. Well, I love those too. And I finally have one to share. Quick backstory. My dad was going through cancer treatments, and I'd given him a blue heart crystal that I'd also charged with Reiki for him to carry in his pocket. That became our thing, both the color blue as well as blue hearts. He would take the rock quietly out of his pocket to show me at family gatherings, doctor visits, and finally when he was in his last days. He passed away last April. I've seen some bluebirds and wondered if any were signs, but I feel him around me and talk to him all the time. About a month ago, I had an extremely stressful situation with a coworker. I was trying my best to deal with it and was asking for help from my guides as well as from my loved ones that have crossed over. I was asking everyone. I was scheduled to have a meeting in HR with this person on a Friday, and the Tuesday before, an entertainer at the nursing home where I worked played I'll Fly Away. I love that song. That was, just as an aside, that was strange because she had been playing more classical pop songs from past decades, not spiritual ones. That was the song I chose to have played at my dad's funeral. Each of my siblings chose one, and that was mine. It touched me, but I really didn't think too much about it. The Friday came, and the uncomfortable meeting was coming up in an hour. I walked to my desk, and there right on my chair was a blue balloon hovering. I sat down, and it just hovered next to me and occasionally pressed into my shoulder. I knew my dad was giving me support. The meeting went horrible with this person, saying accusations and awful lies about me, but I stayed so calm. I left the meeting feeling grateful for how I was able to stay composed, but also very upset inside and worried others believed her. That night, I walked out on my deck, pitch black with woods surrounding our house. I could hear music, possibly from a house on the other side of the woods. This is odd because they would have to be playing it pretty loud. I listened and couldn't believe it, but it was I'll Fly Away. Who blasts that song on a Friday night, I thought. I think my dad realized that the first time he played it for me, I kind of shrugged it off. The next day I was telling my sister about the meeting and started crying because it was so upsetting to me. Well, a bluebird landed on the windowsill where I sat. I couldn't share any of this with my sister. She would just say it was all coincidence. I told my beautiful cousin and my Reiki instructor because I had to share. I feel so lucky that I had support from the other side when I really needed it. Thank you for being another place to share these wonderful stories and for helping us all realize we aren't crazy. What beautiful, beautiful validation in so many ways.
It really is. And even though the meeting didn't go exactly as she wanted, she had that support and comfort and love from her father to know it was all going to be okay. And then he backed it up again by playing the song later that evening.
Right. And you've brought this up a lot as far as having something so that when someone does pass, they'll say, oh, my sign with you will be a bluebird or a blue heart or a blue balloon. And I think that can be really helpful if you have someone that really believes in this or who wants to see if there is anything to mediumship.
Yeah, exactly. It's helpful and comforting and validating. So we love those stories, and we will never think you're crazy if you have a beautiful sign like that. And how could any of that be coincidence?
No, I don't. And just the song, because that's not, and it's a pretty genre specific song in that, I mean, you might hear it on an old country western station, you might hear it on a spiritual station, but just to hear it randomly in a mix, not very often.
No, definitely not. Okay, our next one says, I love your show and you too. Well, thank you. I began listening to Enlightened Empaths in 2022 when I was in a big spiritual crisis, if you will, trying to figure out what to do after leaving a high demand religion, getting divorced from a 34-year marriage, and having a severe career burnout crisis. Simultaneously, I began to have many unexplainable spiritual experiences. I decided to listen to your show and hopefully get some direction and guidance. The one big takeaway from your show was that I heard you both say that when you meet the right teacher, you will know. I kept listening to your show while my whole life was deconstructing and on its way to a rebuild at age 57. Due to struggling with decisions about what to do to transition out of a career that literally made my body feel ill, I decided to schedule a meeting with Denise for my birthday that year, and then I did another reading with someone else who was a guest on your show a month later. I had only ever had one reading before and was kind of skeptical, but definitely desperate for some guidance. Denise's reading began with a bang, and she immediately shared that she saw me on a stage with a headset on and speaking to people all over the world. She said she saw me writing a book also. The reading also had lots of other wonderful goodies, but I'll spare you for now. The next reader began with the same vision. She saw me speaking to people all over the world and writing a book. She also encouraged me to make any decisions related to work with my sacral chakra, as this would be in alignment with my human design as a manifestor generator. Needless to say, I was overwhelmed and perplexed. At that point in my life, I was so exhausted and burned out that becoming a Tony Robbins type motivational type person sounded awful to me. I did follow the advice to make decisions from the sacral chakra, and the only job at that time that sounded like it agreed with my sacral chakra was becoming a shuttle bus driver for the nearby national park. The company would train me to get my CDL, and then I would drive up and down the park canyon all day until I could figure out how the hell to make sense of my life. One day, while in training for this new job, I was handed a headset, to my surprise. And then it hit me. I would be using this to talk to people on the bus in the park where people from all over the world come to visit. I wasn't on a stage, and thank goodness I'm not a motivational speaker, but Denise's prediction was spot on. I would be wearing a headset and speaking to people all over the world, but only on a bus stage. It's now 2.5 years later. I'm still employed as a shuttle driver while I train in energy work and develop my intuitive skills and put these skills to use as a personal growth coach. I'm also maintaining my psychotherapy practice. The book I'm supposed to write has not emerged yet, but I'm not ruling it out. My teacher did show up through synchronicity, and I'm so supremely happy with all the changes in my life. Thank you both for the way you share about your lives and paths to becoming who you are today. It has been such an inspiration for me. As long as you are doing the show, I will be a faithful listener and keep sharing it with my woo-woo friends. Wow. Thank you so much for listening and sharing these wonderful examples from your life. And I just want to say, I really resonate with everything she's saying because going through a divorce is such a difficult emotional drain. And if someone told me I was going to be on a world stage like Tony Rock, I would have felt the same way as her. I remember just wanting to work like 4 hours a day at a library. So like I totally get her. Like the idea of just driving a shuttle bus and talking to people kindly, that seems wonderful to me. I don't know, I just really resonate with everything she's saying. But I love the way she was open to the messages that both you and the other intuitive saw for her, and it came true, but in a way she never would have guessed. And it kind of reminds me of our first listener's question about surrender. You know, when you just kind of surrender, like, okay, my life is so up in the air right now. I have career burnout. I'm going through a divorce. I don't know what I want to do or who I am. It's all deconstructing. I feel like by following her sacral chakra, feelings and emotions and impulses, that was her example of surrendering. And she got this wonderful job where she's able to meet and connect with people from all over the world.
And it's a good example of no matter who you talk to, it as an intuitive, as a reader, as a medium, as a whatever it may be, always remember that it's subjective and for change and free will. So in that moment in time, if I saw her in that aspect and this other reader saw her in that aspect, and I do love that the headset and talking to people all over the world resonated, but I think to always trust yourself with what comes through, and this person did that beautifully by saying, you know what, that's not me. I'm not going to be on a big stage. So I love that. And I think it's a really, really important message.
Well, and who knows what's going to happen? Because, first of all, I would just like to add she's clearly a very good writer. You know, it's a very well written email, and she definitely has a story to tell. Like, I want to read what happened, and I want to read what happens next.
Very true. And
you know, I want to know what happens after the deconstructing process.
Yeah, and time is really, it feels like we're in a time loop or time warp or something from the holodeck on Star Trek lately. Just time is very, very bizarre. I'm glad that the person is happy and driving the bus and getting to meet all these people, and I'm sure it is very inspiring because that makes a huge difference. We used to live in northern Florida by Wakulla Springs, and they had a glass-bottom boat that would take you down the river. And the man who did the boat had a very, 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 he was the speaker on the boat, very entertaining, very gregarious, but he had a very thick Southern accent that was hard to understand. And it's where they filmed the old Tarzan movies. So every once in a while he'd be going, blah, 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 Johnny Weissmuller, and then he would just keep going. But in Anahinga, and I could get these key words, but he was so mesmerizing because of his presence. And my gut feeling is this person is as well.
I love it.
Anyway, after that little rant, our next one says, I've just listened to a recent episode of Enlightened Empaths dealing with near-death experiences. I'm sharing an experience I had approximately 40 years ago, thinking you could help me to gain additional insight into the situation. I was asleep, dreaming, and traveled up something similar to a sun ray, but it was sort of violet. I went to an indescribably beautiful place with flowers, sunshine. The colors were very intense and breathtakingly gorgeous. There was a being behind me who didn't speak but communicated with me. He told me not to try so hard to get my husband and others to attend church, as the most important part of life is to love. I woke up with total recall of this. I believe the reason for this experience was so that I could learn to let go of the hard and fast doctrines I'd learned as a child and become that which I'm meant to be. It sounds easy, but it's a continuous lesson. Possibly it's the reason I'm still alive and in good health at age 89. I'm still learning to be a loving person. Am I missing something that I was to learn? Oh, I think that this person has learned exactly what they were meant to learn. It is about love. And that to me sounds very much like a spontaneous journey of just going to non-ordinary reality. There's there's so much out there that we can't even begin to fathom. And just
Well,
the
and
oh,
the violet ray, doesn't that make you think about the reality of this experience? Because you read in spirituality a lot about the violet ray that comes out of our crown chakra and connects us to all that is.
that's true. And the vividness and the beauty and the intensity of the colors and how breathtakingly gorgeous it was. How many times have we heard people describe that have come back from NDEs that there were colors they couldn't describe, or there were experiences that were so intense and beautiful and emotional? So it does sound like this person was not in this existence.
I agree. And hats off to this person at 89 to say, I'm still learning to be a loving person and I'm still learning how to, let go of some of these hard and fast doctrines I had learned as a child. One thing I've noticed watching, my parents get older and some of my friends' parents get older, I don't know, I saw like a tendency, Denise, where they tended to hold on to their religious beliefs way more than they did in their younger adulthood. Do you see that with some elderly people?
Yes. And some of
And
it is the culture of there's community. There's community and culture with organized religion for a lot of folks.
yes, and I think it's also safety. I mean, my mom started praying to Mother Mary every day. I don't know if she did like a full rosary every day, but I think she did most days. And I was like, Mom, where is this coming from? Because it was usually my dad and I who wanted to go to church. And
Hmm.
she was like, "Oh, Mother Mary comforts me, and she's not going to leave me alone when I die. I'm going to be, held up in her embrace." And I was like, "Okay, like, that's great." But I see that a lot where they kind of lock in instead of remaining open. So I love that this person had this awake dreaming experience, which does sound like an NDE, and didn't dismiss it. Didn't hold on to those hard and fast doctrines and dismiss it.
And that they mentioned that they're sharing an experience from 40 years ago. And you can tell by the way it's written that the vividness, the memory, the experience is still as clear as you and I are talking right now,
Exactly.
which is really indicative of it being something more than just a dream. I mean, I have a couple. Now, I can't say that I do. I don't have dreams that I have visitations that I remember with that clarity. But I think when I've had dreams that have that clarity, there has been a visitation involved.
Yes, I think when we have those awake dream experiences, it's not a dream. It's not like a wispy tendril you have to hold on to as you're waking up. When you have those experiences where it does feel as though your soul went somewhere else, that's to me sign number one that your soul did indeed go somewhere else. Because my experiences I've had that I wrote about in the Awake Dreamer and shared so many others from listeners and other people, that's the hallmark, is you never forget it and it feels realer than real. And I think they're gifts. I really do. I think that they are gifts when we have those experiences. But I also think that we can prime ourselves for those experiences by really practicing self-care. I went on vacation last week and I really unplugged. I really did, and didn't have Wi-Fi for a lot of it, which was very, very nice. And I had two amazing awake dream experiences. One of them was a visit with my dad. I don't
Oh,
think, yeah, it was really lovely. I don't think I would have had that if I'd had been keeping up my normal pace of work, 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 go, go, go. So I think we have to also press the pause button sometimes so that we can be receptive to these experiences.
I agree. I definitely agree with that, and it's also wonderful that you were able to unplug and have genuine self care and relax. That
Yeah,
that's a biggie.
thank you.
Uh,
I think we all need it, but I don't think you have to go on vacation to get it, you
no, I
know?
think it has to become part of our everyday routine of our life,
Yeah.
and but we do have another one that says, I was listening to your latest podcast on anxiety, and it completely brought things into perspective for me as an extremely sensitive empath. I can relate to every aspect of anxiety that was spoken about. I only wish I'd had this guidance as a teenager. I've spent my whole life in survival mode and the highs and lows of depression. I didn't recognize the depression until I was in my 40s, so I pushed even harder to keep going. Then in my late 50s, menopause hit me. Let's just say that turned things completely inside out, upside down, and backwards to the point where I don't know who I am anymore. All my life, I had this feeling of sitting in a chair with my hands tied behind my back, unable to break free. I'm a very gifted empath, but I've never been able to see my path as it's always been shrouded with anxiety. Through your podcast, I've come to realize how anxiety has kept me in survival mode my entire life. Thank you both, all you do to help others understand their struggles, and for your compassion, integrity, and commitment. And I've gotten a few emails about and comments and texts from people about the anxiety issue, and I it got me thinking about, is that a facet for many empaths that because of our high sensitivity, it can mask or be or correlate with anxiety that we might not recognize?
Yes, I 100% think so. And I think that it's often hard to recognize. I mean, I still struggle with it. I think I shared on that show, every time I do yoga, the instructor will say, drop your shoulders. And I'm like, well, mine are dropped. And then I check and I'm like, oh, no, I'm hunching. Like, I don't think we even realize when we're carrying it in our body. You know what I mean?
Right. And the person mentioned survival mode, and that the cortisol rush, the adrenaline rush, the inability, exactly what you were saying a minute ago, the inability to relax and take time because it's not an option. And I think that that just exasperates anxiety and causes us to go into that fight or flight mode, or to sequester, or become, to close ourselves down and step back from the world.
And do you think it gets to a point where that chronic anxiety feels so natural that being relaxed feels unnatural?
Oh, I definitely, yes, 100%, because I was going through some stuff over the holidays and shredding some old documents and releasing some old trauma stuff. And right after the holidays, and I thought, it flashed me back to when you step out of a dark place, how uncomfortable it feels because you have no experience, or you've been in that place for so long, that when things calm down, or it's easier, or there's less stress, or you're not always on red alert, you might have a steep learning curve because you
And that's
don't have any
okay.
familiarity with it. Right.
Yeah, that's okay. I think it's important to recognize it, and to really work with someone or your own journal and prayer life and meditative practice to work through that. Because we talked about this years ago. We did a show on that book, The Body Never Lies, or The Body Keeps Score.
Mm-hmm.
And that one was so helpful to me. I remember this was such a good tip for me about anxiety and holding on to stuff from the past. I was talking to my therapist about all the stuff we had gone through with my ex-husband's shooting. And it was probably, I don't know, Denise, 6 or 7 years after the shooting. And as I'm telling the therapist the story, I started to cry. And I was like, oh gosh, why am I crying? It was, it's in the past. And he said, that's a sign that your body's holding on to the anxious, fearful energy you went through during that period. And that's okay. You've got to cry it out. And so I think
Oh,
it's important, if you're if you are like clearing out old papers and letters and things like you were talking about, and it brings up a physical reaction of either like your heart accelerating or you're crying or what have you, that's not a bad thing. It's just a
No.
sign that it's still there. And, talking about it, journaling about it, but also crying about it is one of the ways that we can work to release it. Because I think anxiety is really, I mean, there's so much to it, but I think one part of it is just trying to hold it all together. When we're trying to hold it all together, what we're really doing is holding it all in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not always the best thing for us.
No, and if you wouldn't anxiety be a natural byproduct to a highly sensitive child that was told to toughen up or don't wear your heart on your sleeve or you're being too sensitive or you all the messages that so many highly sensitive empathic children may have received, that seems that it would manifest in anxiety as well, that could become a lifelong issue until someone realizes that it's really a cool thing to be as sensitive as we are.
It is a really cool thing, but I do think it's very, very hard when you don't know that you are an empath, because especially as a kid, you pick up on all the invisible energies and the subtle cues.
Yes.
And, you tell your parents like, "Hey, are you okay? Something seems off." Or you ask your teacher, "Are you sad?" And they look at you like, "No," because they're trying to hold it all in and hold it all together. And then you feel silly and weird and, odd man out for recognizing that invisible energy. So it's a process, that's for sure.
I was thinking about that the other day, that we always say kids around 6, 7, 8 years old start to shut it down. They don't see things as well. And they say, well, they go off to school or they're social or their abstract thinking gets to that place, cognitive development, natural, natural things that happen in your brain. But then I started thinking about, you've taken these sensitive kids or these empathic children or these children who have lived in one environment, and then you throw them into, I'm going to use public school as an example, which if you've worked in a public school or any school, it doesn't have to be public school, there's a vibration of energy when you pull that many people together. And imagine those little people being put into that and absorbing all that from all different directions. I think
A lot.
it is a lot. It's a lot for the adults that work in there. But I wonder too if that could be a reason why uh, some children may start to become more shy or more hesitant or hold back or have anxiety. I think there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, I do too. I 100% do. And I'm glad we did that show because it has been really good feedback on it. It's helpful to
Yes,
talk about and think about and recognize.
right. And as we were doing that show, I did recognize a lot of those things in myself, especially during different stages of my life or different times of my life. So you've always addressed this so beautifully, that if you're in a season of your life, and maybe that's when you really need to amp up and do a little self-care, get up 15 minutes earlier or sit in the parking lot, get to the pickup line a few minutes early so you can have some quiet time before the kids get in, or just anything, or just be kinder to yourself.
Or work with a crystal. I have a very embarrassing story to share before before we close out. So I'm in the process of selling my house and getting ready to close it and buy a new house, and it's all very happy and wonderful and positive change, but it's making me super anxious. I've been in this house forever and there's a lot to do. And I was sitting in bed the other night and I had a headache. And when you have a headache, like not from anything like lack of magnesium or you're dehydrated, it's a stress headache. I could feel it all in my third eye. It was like my third eye was clogged up with all my thoughts going everywhere. And so I have a channeler quartz. It's just a clear quartz that terminates into three different sides. And anyway, I reached for that crystal, and Denise, I put the base of the crystal on my third eye. I looked like a mother loving unicorn, okay?
Hmm.
Because the point was sticking out of my forehead. And I just sat there and I said, to the crystal, please take any stress or anxious thoughts or worries that are blocking my ability to sleep and rest and properly, readdress my energy so I can be at my best in the morning, and just direct it out through your crystal self. Thank you. My headache was gone in like under 10 seconds.
Oh, I love
I've never
that.
had such a powerful experience like that. It was just, and I was like, well, Samantha, maybe that's the placebo effect. But I was like, well, how could that be the placebo effect when I didn't really believe it could work that quickly or that effectively? And really, if you want to work with crystals to help with a headache, you're supposed to use clear quartz and amethyst.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it was my placebo. I think it really just did its job. It was amazing.
Oh, I love that.
And I slept beautifully.
Win-win.
But I'm still worried and anxious during the day about packing up all my stuff and like, what do I keep and what do I let go of? I am saving all the American Girl dolls for my kids, but there's other stuff of theirs. And I'm like, ugh, do I take pictures of all their artwork? Do I pack it all up? You know, that stuff.
Yeah.
So my crystals are helping with all those decisions.
Good thing you have the team to help. It's perfect.
That's right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And don't forget, you can always use your own single terminated crystal and look like your own unicorn. Just hope no one walks in and sees you standing there looking strange with your crystal poking out of your forehead. But what works, works for us empaths. We're all in this together, right?
Right.
Okay, everyone, have a great week. Please remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.